Good morning, my loves. I have not been on here a ton. There's been a lot going on behind the scenes, not just with the business and taking on clients and building the new website and the online course, but also just personally. We have made a transition to homeschool, which has always been on the table as an option, because my daughter has inherited my nervous system, and where school was a refuge for me and a place where things were predictable and safe, school for her has been a challenge that felt unsafe, essentially from day one. And it became abundantly clear within the last few months that it was not a good fit for her. From a standpoint of the culture in the school and just the nature of how schools operate and how they function. And honestly, I think that the way schools are run is probably not a good fit for most children, because most children cannot sit and listen and concentrate for hours on end a day and spend that much time sitting still. And most children do not thrive in environments where they are ranked and measured, and have a lot of emphasis on achieving. And, I don't think a lot of people are taking a lot of time to sit and think deeply about that because they don't have other options, right? And because we're all so busy trying to survive and earn the money, so that we can eat and have a roof over our heads, and often doing all of that and still struggling to get by. And so we are just really fortunate that I have a job where I could take my kids with me to work, and I can, for the most part, set my own schedule. And I have support to have backup when I need somebody to watch the kids, and my husband's schedule can be flexible. And so it happens to work for us in a way that it doesn't work for a lot of people. And I don't know that we will stay homeschooling forever, but certainly we are going to take some time to figure out what our next moves are. And so far, Zoe's occupational therapist has noted how much calmer and more relaxed she seems, and she is back to being more curious and enthusiastic about learning, which for me is huge because I have a kid who's innately curious, which I think most kids are, and she's just exceptionally curious, and she loves to read, and she loves beekeeping, and I know she's going to be fine no matter what. And it's just, figuring out what path is best for her right now, and understanding there is no right or wrong in this, right? Because she's going to be fine regardless. So there's been that, and then there's been that our bulldog, our pantry greeter, Sergeant Pepper, who he wasn't even 4 years old yet, right? He's a young dog. He is a bundle of energy, just loves everyone and everything, no concept of boundaries, expects everyone to love him back, just like the constant wiggle, I'm so excited and in love with life. Well, he developed a seizure disorder and also had some advanced airway disease. And so we did surgery for his airway, we did medication for his seizures, and the issue being that every time he would have a seizure or get stressed out, he would get so worked up and anxious that his airway would swell, and then he'd go into respiratory distress and he would need an ICU stay. And so since June, he had several ICU stays and hospital admissions, and we did all of these things hoping to improve his quality of life, and to give him a chance at a decent length of life. And what happened was actually quite the opposite. There was just nothing we could do to make him better. He continued to get worse, and we kept holding out hope that, that we could get him stable, that we could add a medication that would help, that the side effects wouldn't be hard for him to tolerate. And it just, hope sometimes is such a gut punch, because it can also make you feel like you should or could be doing more. And ultimately, I brought him in for a routine vet visit. Not that anything is routine with a bulldog. And my whole family was up in Vermont, because they wanted to go be in the path of totality for the eclipse. And I was not up for it because I have a lot of air in my constitution, and travel can get me air imbalanced, which doesn't feel good, right? Like just the feeling untethered and scattered and anxious and overwhelmed, and trouble sleeping. And so that did not sound like a good time to me. In general, travel feels like more work for me than staying home. I really like being home. I've done a lot of energy work in this house. It's more predictable. It's easier for me to ground here. And so, right, like to get me traveling, it generally needs to be someplace I really want to go, which is usually someplace in the woods with lots of nature, or someplace that's going to be, right, really grounding for me. So I stayed behind knowing that I needed to rest. And because I had been invited to give a keynote speech on Wednesday, and I wanted to be prepared, and like I knew what I wanted to talk about, but I like hadn't sat down and written the speech out. And so I brought this dog for his routine vet appointment. I talked to the vet about the most recent medication we put him on, because his seizures, like he was having like 7 at a time, and they were getting really close together, where like he wasn't even like fully recovered, and then he was going into the next round of seizures. And so we like added this medication, and they told me that he was going to get more hungry. And I'm like, okay, like we've done steroids before, like we're used to the increased hunger, we're into the increased thirst, right? Like he's been on steroids all of the time for his breathing. And this was not that. This was all he was interested in was food, right? Like 24 hours a day, he is ripping apart my kitchen looking for something to eat. This dog, who I used to have to separate from my other dog because he would just allow her to eat all his food, was now like ripping off or attempting to rip off her face if I was in the kitchen cooking and I had to separate them. Like he just did not have a lot of quality of life. And so when I took him to the vet, I have to sedate him to bring him to the vet. He was still getting worked up. They wanted to divide his vaccines into 2 visits. I'm like, like this is him sedated. This is a lot of stress on him. And stress can also trigger seizures the same way the vaccines can. And we all know, right, seizures are a life-threatening emergency for him every time they happen because he gets all worked up and then he can't breathe, even with the airway surgery, and even with the sedation. And, it wasn't our regular vet. And I know that this vet, like, wants to do all of the things. She's very thorough. And she was telling me, like, it was appropriate to question his quality of life, but she did not seem interested in having that conversation, and instead was like, well, we're going to do this thing, and we're going to do that thing, and we're going to do this testing. And what came out of it was that we were going to check his his level and maybe be able to reduce the dose, and maybe that could reduce the side effects. And like there was no discussion about, right, like alternatives to him being on that medication, even though, right, that was the conversation that I was really trying to have with her. And essentially it was like there are no other options, and like that didn't necessarily feel true to me, in terms of like, well, can we increase his Keppra? Can we see how he does without it? Because they did increase his Keppra. And ultimately, when I brought him home, he had a little increased work of breathing, but he like lay down and he was resting. And I figured he needed some space to calm down, because me being around him will generally work him up a little more because there's people. So just letting him have a quiet space to settle. And so I went to a meeting and I came back and his breathing was a little noisier, but he was still pink. He was really tired and he was just like out of it, right? Like he wasn't himself. He didn't want his dinner. He didn't want me near him. He didn't want to be touched. It didn't look so much like he was in respiratory distress as he was just off. And I didn't know whether it was a side effect from his vaccines. I didn't know if he was just worn out because it was kind of late at night. And I didn't know if he had a seizure while I was out, because like that was also on the table. And so I hung out with him for a bit to see, generally when he seizures, he'll have a bunch in a row to see if he was going to have another seizure. And then I went up to bed, like still hoping that he would turn around overnight and look better in the morning. Because like we've seen that happen when he's had seizures, right? Like he looks a little worked up, and like I had called my husband to tell him what was going on, and like we both decided to not bring him in because we knew it would be another ICU stay, and that's like so much stress on him and takes him forever to recover. And also like I knew if I was bringing him in, then that we were going to ask to have him put down, because we've already had this discussion about, right, like no more ICU stays. And the emergency vet knew that because we had that talk with them last time we came, and that was why we had added the additional medication, because we basically were like, either we get the seizures under better control or we put him down, because like this is not kind. And so I went upstairs and I did my practices, and I sat with my feelings, and I prayed, and I sent violet flame into the situation, which brings about the highest good, and I sent him Reiki. And when I woke up the next morning and I came downstairs, like I knew he was gone. And of course, like I fell apart, and I immediately went into, right, like this is all my fault, right? It's my fault. Like I should have brought him in, like we should have given him another shot. And right. And even though I know that's not true, right? That even though it felt like I killed my dog, like I didn't kill my dog. Like not intervening is not actively harming him, right? And like what was underneath all of that, like the simultaneous feeling of I didn't do enough for him, and I put him through too much, and like I should have just had him put down when he had the first seizure and the first ICU stay, and I can't believe I put him through all of this, and all he did was suffer, and it never got better, and now the suffering feels really cruel. You know, what was under all of that is this irrational desire to be able to prevent suffering. Right? That I, despite being human and despite not being omniscient, could not prevent my dog from suffering. Because I really, really wanted to, right? Like I don't want anyone to suffer. Like that is my dharma in this life, right? My life purpose is to help ease suffering, to connect people to the divine, so that they could heal themselves, to connect people to their powers so they could heal themselves in their communities, right? And like I know the divine fingerprints were all over this, right? Like, when are my kids ever not home? When am I ever here by myself? This dog had every seizure, every crisis on my watch. And he's not my dog. He's my husband's dog. I picked this dog. I picked this dog from a place of grieving my last bulldog who lived to 11 and died in her sleep. And like, somehow that also felt like not enough time, and I should have done more. And like, I was so afraid of losing another bulldog that I like waited over a year and got a dog that had been genetically tested, and he still got a seizure disorder, right? And he died super early. And I could have had a really nice car for all of the money I've spent on this dog. Because like, that little sliver of hope, man. And the beautiful gift that Sergeant Pepper left, beyond like the entire community of support, right? The entire pantry was praying for this dog and invested in him and holding us up when he passed. And beyond that, which that alone is huge, right? He completely trashed my kitchen, our kitchen, right? Like, he ate the cabinets, he ate the trim, he generally ate anything that fell on the floor or that he could reach. In the end, he was like figuring out how to counter surf, which is impressive because he was really round and low to the ground. And so I have not, right? Like, I have not been able to have nice things, for like material things for the past like 3+ years, right? If he got out of the kitchen and was unsupervised, he would like mark everything in the house, right? And so in this space of putting myself back together, I also get to put the house back together, and I get to clean. And for me, like, deep cleaning always feels like it's inner work, and it's clearing energy out, and releasing and letting go of things. For me, it never feels separate. Like, cleaning is always energy work for me. And so being someone who has a fair amount of fire in the air that likes to move, right? Fire likes to do, air likes to move. I have been repairing and deeply cleaning my kitchen and my house, and not erasing the evidence he was here. Like, I haven't even fully wood puttied all of the chewing. Like, I left a little bit of it, just so, right, there's that little bit of memory of him. But like, getting the cabinets painted and like getting that almost sense of fresh start, right? Because interestingly, the house is calmer. The house is calmer without him here, because for the last, 9 months, 10 months, we have been gripped by fear, right? Like, this fear of knowing we're going to lose him and not knowing when and not knowing how. And like, that is our relationship with everybody all of the time, right? But we could stay in this illusion that everything is fine. And what Sergeant Pepper did was force us to release that illusion, right? That like, he's on borrowed time, but like, nothing is borrowed. Like, he passed exactly when he was meant to pass. But like, we knew that he was sick. We never knew when he was going to have a seizure. We never knew when he was going to need an intervention. And it sort of held everybody hostage, right? Because you're always listening for him. You're always checking on him, even though you try to release it, and know it's out of your hands. Like, it's just, it's a scary thing, right? Like, that fear of the unknown and how it's going to happen, and the fear of losing him. The fear of losing him was actually worse than losing him, because we didn't know how much more he was going to suffer. We didn't know how that was going to go with making the decision. Like, I didn't want to make that decision for him. I begged Source to not have to make that decision. I begged Sarge to not have to make that decision. And, right, like, and that was a gift that he made it himself. And the day after he passed, when I dropped into my heart to meditate, and check in with all of my child selves that I've done work on, because I check in with them every morning and I see how we're all doing. He was in there, right? Like, he was in my heart, like, bouncing around, totally uninhibited by being ill, full of energy and enthusiasm, like he was before he got sick. And it felt so real that I burst into tears, right? Because it just felt like, look at me, Mom. Like, I am so good, right? Like, I am so much better. And even when I went into the manifesting work I do daily, and I'm like with all of the people who care about me, right? And we're like in a ring, and we are calling in what we're calling in life, right? Like the safety and the love and the protection and feeling seen and heard and valued. And we're like in there, doing this manifesting, and he's like bouncing on everybody and interrupting, which is so his energy, right? And right, like, that is the gift of deep presence, when you can like really drop under all of it, when you can really connect with yourself, right? Because the separateness is an illusion. We're all energy. He didn't go anywhere, right? Like, he left his physical body, but his energy, his soul, is still very bright and with us. And when you can really anchor into your heart, like, you could connect with anything, right? Like, maybe not immediately, but like, that is why we work on our practices, and that is why we sit with it. Because when you're really connected with your most divine self, like, you can feel into being connected to everything. Like, that is the bliss, right? That is the bliss that people chase in meditation. It's that connection into everything, the feeling the love, feeling the creation energy, feeling the expansiveness, the warmth. And now Sgt. Pepper's part of that. And when I want to be with him, I can drop in there and I can feel him there. And it feels like the energy he had when he was here. And so whatever your heart today, I hope you can feel that you're not alone. And I hope you can also see the beauty in it, right? And that's not to negate the hard, like, it's the yin and yang, like, there's always both. That is the contrast, right? There's light and dark. And yeah, like, the grief is such a gut punch. It's really hard, and it comes in waves, and right, and it feels unfair. And I tell my daughter all the time, my daughter is very preoccupied with what is fair. And I was very that way as a kid, right? Like, freedom and justice, or burn it all down, like, even at the age she is now, right? And what I often will ask her is, well, does life owe you fairness? Like, can you think of anything about life that's fair? And she doesn't really want fair either. Like, we've had that conversation too, because like what she actually wants is privilege. And fair is actually not her jam, because she does not want to have, right, the same as her brother. She wants to have more than him. But like this whole thing with the grief, right? Like it feels unfair. It feels like he was cheated. It feels like we were cheated. And also that's not true, because this is what his soul signed up for. And we don't get say on that, right? And clearly we also signed up for this because this is the dog we picked. And ironically, there was a different puppy that I was going to bring home, and I didn't bring that puppy home because it sounded like it was having issues breathing. Like, this dog was every fear of mine, like, smacked in my face, right? Like, fear of losing a dog early, fear of having a dog with breathing problems, fear of causing harm and suffering, right? Just fear of all of it. Like, here are all your worst fears, like packaged in a small, compact being. Go work all of them. Right? And that feels like that was what his assignment was. Right? And then there's guilt around that it now has impacted my whole family, and my family had to go through that. But you know what? Their soul signed up for that too. And there's no one-way healing, just like there is no one-way liberation. And there's no separate. Like, we're all in this together. And it is hard, and it's also beautiful. And this morning, you know, as I continue to put my kitchen back together, right? Like, I was bursting into tears, but it's not just the sad, right? Like, it's also gratitude. Like, there's so much gratitude and full heart because look how our community has showed up to rally around us, and look at how many lives this dog touched. Who was destructive and didn't respect boundaries and would mark everything in the house, including my other dog. And like, people are mourning him because he showed up with love, right? He made things messy and difficult, and God, we all still miss him. And so maybe that's all we need to do, right? Maybe that's why his life was so short. Because he already had it figured out. Just show up for everything with love and enthusiasm. And like, maybe that's the assignment. What does it look like to show up from a place of love today? Love for yourself, love for your neighbors. And that doesn't mean being a doormat. That means having those healthy boundaries. And just, asking, like, what does showing up from a place of loving myself look like today? What can I do for myself to show myself I love myself? So that is my lengthy update. If you're still listening, I am still here. I still love all of you. I can share the keynote speech for anybody who's interested in it. Sergeant Pepper changed the trajectory of that too. The topic was the same. It was on the importance of community and healthy communities, but he definitely added a much more human element. So I appreciate him for that too. And I appreciate all of you. And I'm just wishing you a lot of love and peace today.